Okay, let's unpack this. You might have seen the headlines recently. Pretty dramatic news about Harvard University.
Hmm.
One of the most renowned institutions in the world, having its ability to enroll international students just revoked by the U.S. government.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty wild, right? Like
It
something
is.
you'd maybe skim and think, what's going on there?
Exactly.
But when you really take a deep dive into the source material we've got today, the story, well, it reveals layers about politics, academic freedom, the rule of law.
Mhm.
It's far more complex than a simple headline.
Absolutely. And the sources our listeners sent in give us a really rich picture here. We're pulling from a commentary by Harvard alumni that was published in Harvard Magazine reacting to the university's position.
Okay.
We've got news reports from places like CNA, Al Jazeera, the BBC, covering the actual international student ban and its fallout.
Right.
And also insights from constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe, gleaned from various news articles and interviews he's done.
Got it. So for this deep dive, our mission is really to cut through the noise. We want to unpack the events that led to this, well, pretty unprecedented action.
Yeah.
Explore the immediate consequences, and maybe the broader ones too, for everyone involved, and understand the different perspectives from people actually affected, like alumni, students, and also from legal experts looking at the bigger picture.
Right.
And why should you care? Because this isn't just about Harvard. It touches on really fundamental issues, like the government's role in academia,
Huge question.
the global standing of U.S. higher education, and some really deep questions about constitutional rights and, the limits of political power. It's a big one.
It really is. And based on the sources, the recent tensions seem to trace back to mid-April.
Go ahead.
We saw an April 14th letter from the Trump administration that reportedly made pretty significant demands. We're talking sweeping changes in university governance and academic affairs.
Wow, sweeping changes. And that same day, Harvard President Alan Garber responded.
He did, same day. Our sources highlight that he rejected those demands flat out. Describe them as intrusive regulation of academic affairs.
Intrusive regulation, okay.
Yeah, so that direct pushback from the university president himself definitely captured attention.
I bet. Which brings us to the escalation.
Exactly. Fast forward just over a month to May 22nd, 2025. That's when the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, delivered the major blow, revoking Harvard's authority to enroll international students.
And the stated reasons from DHS, according to the reports we have, they included accusations of anti-American behavior,
Right.
anti-Semitism on campus, and even alleged links to the Chinese Communist Party. Pretty heavy charges.
They are very heavy. And the sources connect these accusations back to earlier tensions, specifically those student protests against Israel's war on Gaza that had taken place over the past year.
Okay, right.
The administration, according to these reports, accused Harvard of basically fostering an unsafe and hostile campus environment. They pointed to alleged anti-Semitic incidents and what they saw as a failure to adequately address what they termed pro-Hamas activism.
The reports also mention criticism from officials directed at Harvard's diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, DEI.
Yeah, DEI. Apparently, these policies were viewed as discriminatory by the administration. And alongside that were suspicions about alleged ties between Harvard and Chinese institutions. Though, it's interesting to note, the sources we reviewed state that no direct evidence for those specific ties was actually made public.
Okay, so accusations, but maybe not public proof on that front.
Seems that way. And it's worth noting this didn't come entirely out of the blue.
Oh.
One source mentions an earlier threat from DHS back on April 16th. That was just 2 days after that initial exchange of letters we talked about. That threat indicated that Harvard's eligibility to enroll international students would be revoked unless the university provided specific information on international students' disciplinary records and their participation in protests.
So the writing was kind of on the wall then.
In a sense, yeah. The pressure was building.
Wow. So just days after saying no to the demands, the threat appeared, and then a month later, the hammer dropped. How did Harvard react to the actual ban?
Well, Harvard's reaction was immediate and very strong, according to a statement cited in our sources. They called the action retaliatory
Retaliatory.
and unlawful retaliation. They warned that it threatened serious harm to the Harvard community and our country, and explicitly said it undermines Harvard's academic and research mission.
Undermines the mission.
Yes. And crucially, the university stated it intended to fight the move in court.
Right, a legal battle.
Yeah.
And what about the people directly impacted? I mean, what does this mean for the students?
The impact on students is massive and immediate. The ban affects approximately 6,800 foreign students currently studying at Harvard.
6,800.
Yeah. To give you a sense of scale, that's about 27% of their total student body.
Wow, that's a huge chunk of the student population. What are they facing now?
Serious uncertainty. I mean, these students are now essentially forced to find places to study at other universities in the U.S.
Oh, man.
And they have to do it quickly, otherwise they risk losing their visa status.
Which could potentially lead to deportation.
Potentially, yes. Sources capture the anxiety among foreign students, worried about having to transfer or just return home. A key point here is that being registered in the SEVP system,
SEVP.
yeah, the Student and Exchange Visitor Program system, it's what the government uses to track international students. Being registered in that is fundamental for maintaining student visa status.
Got it.
So blocking Harvard from that system could directly lead to visa violations for students enrolled there.
And what's the timeline on this? Do they have any kind of grace period?
Well, typically, if a student finishes their studies, F1 visa holders get 60 days. J1s get 30 days to leave the U.S.
Okay.
However, termination of status because of a violation, like, say, not being registered in SEVP through an accredited institution, well, that could mean they have to leave immediately.
Immediately.
Wow. Yeah. The specific timeline the government might impose for these Harvard students to transfer or depart is actually one of the big uncertainties highlighted by the sources.
So potentially thousands of students could have their education, their lives here, just thrown into chaos very suddenly.
But that seems to be the risk, yeah.
What about the impact on the university itself,
Yeah.
beyond just the enrollment numbers?
It's significant. Sources quote an education consultant pointing out that Harvard is losing a massive chunk of their STEM graduate students.
STEM grads.
And that has a direct impact on their ability to conduct high-level research across, many scientific and technical fields.
Harvard President Garber himself addressed this, didn't he, back in April?
He did. In that April letter, he stated the government's actions would have severe and long-lasting consequences. He specifically called out how research could be jeopardized, even mentioning specific areas like studies on childhood cancer, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, really critical stuff.
Wow. And the financial implications must be substantial, too.
Oh, absolutely. Bloomberg is cited in sources reporting that Harvard received roughly U.S. $700 million in research funding from various federal agencies just last academic year.
700 million.
Yeah. And on top of that, most international students pay full tuition.
Right.
For the upcoming academic year, that's $59,320 plus fees, room, and board. It brings the total cost to around $86,926 per year per student.
Okay.
So if you multiply that by the 6,800 international students,
That's a lot.
you're looking at well over $591 million in annual revenue just from international student fees alone.
That's a huge hit.
Yeah.
Both research funding and tuition revenue. Has Harvard indicated how they might try to manage that shortfall?
Yes, they have. Sources report Harvard has announced plans to allocate an extra U.S. $250 million of university money.
From their own funds.
Exactly. This is intended to help cover research costs for the coming academic year. It adds to the roughly $500 million they already spend annually from their own funds on research.
So a significant internal investment to try and bridge the gap.
It looks that way, yeah. A serious attempt to mitigate the loss.
This situation at Harvard also feels like it could be, I don't know, a warning sign. For the broader U.S. higher education landscape, are other universities potentially at risk?
That's definitely a concern highlighted in the sources. Homeland Security Secretary Noam reportedly stated in an interview that her department was absolutely considering similar actions at other universities.
Absolutely. Wow.
Yeah. She framed the move against Harvard as a warning to every other university and, indeed, to all universities and academic institutions across the country.
So not just Harvard.
Apparently not. She was quite direct, adding that enrolling foreign students and benefiting from their tuition payments is a privilege, not a right, for universities.
A privilege, not a right. That's a very strong statement, kind of setting a precedent.
It is.
Is there any legal pushback happening more broadly beyond just Harvard's planned lawsuit?
There is, actually. While it's not immediately clear how directly it impacts the Harvard ban itself, one source mentions a separate ruling from a federal judge. Also, on May 22nd, the same day the Harvard ban was announced, that ruling blocked the administration's plan to terminate the legal status of hundreds of foreign students across the country.
Hundreds.
Without following what the judge deemed proper regulatory procedures. So it suggests there's already some legal questioning of the administration's methods regarding international students, more generally.
Interesting timing.
It is. And specifically for Harvard, as we said, they've reportedly assembled a legal team, includes some high-profile lawyers like former special counsel Robert Hur, to challenge this ban in court.
Robert Hur. Okay, so they're bringing out the big guns.
Seems like it.
So the legal battle is definitely on. What are legal experts generally saying about the potential outcomes or, the implications here?
Well, experts quoted in the sources are warning of major risks, both to U.S. higher education as a whole and to international student programs specifically.
Major risks.
Yeah, they're using terms like academic shockwaves to describe the potential fallout.
Academic shockwaves.
Yeah.
And for the students caught in the middle of all this, beyond the uncertainty, is the university offering any support?
Yes. According to one source, Harvard has put dedicated advisory resources in place,
Okay, good.
trying to help affected students understand their rights and explore potential transfer options to other institutions.
Okay, well, that's something at least. Let's look beyond the immediate events and impacts then. Our deep dive included perspectives directly from the Harvard community, right? Specifically, some letters published in Harvard Magazine from alumni. What did those reveal?
Yeah, they show a definite range of reactions, as you might expect. Some alumni expressed really strong support and pride in President Garber and the faculty for their stance against the government's demands. One alumnus, who actually identified as a lifelong Republican, called the demands insane. Yeah, and commended Harvard for fighting for its integrity and freedom from what they saw as governmental overreach. They argued that appeasement wouldn't work with Trump and even cited Columbia as an example where they felt it was ineffective.
Interesting perspective. And another alumnus also seemed to applaud Harvard.
Yes, for standing up to what they termed the bully Donald Trump and to what they called illegal and unconstitutional demands. They specifically mentioned the demands related to diversity, equity, and inclusion policies.
DEI policies again?
Right. And this particular alumnus, who apparently worked on relevant federal programs for over 30 years, offered a specific take on DEI. They argued that affirmative action is often misunderstood and that properly implemented DEI or affirmative action programs, in their view, do not violate civil rights law.
So they're saying the administration's demands were improper based on the law.
That was their argument, yeah. They even noted that the Supreme Court, in the recent Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard case, the big one dealing with race-conscious admissions,
Right.
the majority opinion did not equate racial preferences with affirmative action. Justice Thomas specifically referred to it as so-called affirmative action.
So a legal distinction being drawn there by an alumnus with policy background.
Exactly, arguing there's a nuance that the administration might be ignoring.
Interesting. What are some other reactions from these alumni letters?
Well, another alumnus felt that Harvard's defiance actually helped restore faith and pride. Faith that they felt had been strained by what they described as noisy public posturing and bullying disloyalty from several wealthy alumni.
Internal dynamics there too.
Seems so. This writer also brought up their concerns about America's criminal collusion and profound moral culpability in bullying, ethnic cleansing, and mass murder in Palestine.
Okay, connecting it to broader geopolitical issues.
Yes. Stating they had hoped to hear Harvard offer more forceful support for students and faculty who protested this issue. They viewed Trump's actions against Harvard as a kind of standard gambit used by wannabe dictators, borrowing a term from Tim Snyder.
Tim Snyder, the historian.
Right, to try and humble independent institutions, and they felt the noisy bluster about anti-Semitism in this context was hollow and cynical. This writer also expressed feeling generally disaffected from the federal government.
So a real mix of pride in Harvard's stand, specific legal arguments, and linking the university's actions to these much broader political and moral concerns. Any other notable points from the letters?
One letter writer raised even broader concerns, kind of painting with a wider brush. They worried about those in power seemingly ignoring major issues like climate change, potentially crippling medical research, which ties back to that research funding point we discussed.
Yeah.
Denying social safety net benefits, and, notably, denying what they called the founder's wisdom on free speech. They used a pretty vivid comparison likening these actions to herds of oxen goring everyone.
Wow, strong imagery.
Hmm.
It's specifically on the complex issue of anti-Semitism on campus, which, remember, was one of the administration's stated reasons for the ban. Did the alumni letters touch on that directly?
Yes, one did. An alumnus agreed that the term anti-Semitism needs to be addressed, but cautioned that they felt it has been weaponized to an extreme for political purposes.
Weaponized.
Yeah, used to silence discussion beyond Jewish life, as they put it. They suggested that because some members of the Jewish community hold positions that others might feel threatened by, perhaps anti-Semitism isn't always the best or only term to describe everything that's occurring on campus.
Suggesting nuance is needed there, too.
Exactly. They recommended considering a more universal term, or maybe additional terms, to protect all identities and ideas, and suggested, practically, a meeting with a broad spectrum of Jewish community members to find a better way forward on that specific issue.
It's clear there are really deeply felt and diverse perspectives within the Harvard community itself about all this.
Definitely.
Now, to add another layer of understanding, we also looked at insights from constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe. He's a professor emeritus at Harvard Law, argued tons of times before the Supreme Court, advised political figures. He brings a specific legal and historical lens, right?
Absolutely. And Tribe offered his perspective on the broader context of the government's actions against Harvard. He described the current situation not really as a sudden crisis moment, but more like something insidious.
Insidious?
Yeah, like a spreading disease or virus that's been attacking the foundations of the rule of law and kind of hollowing out the body politic over time.
Hollowing out.
Yeah. He even used that famous quote from T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men, saying, "This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper," suggesting a gradual erosion rather than a sudden collapse.
That's a pretty stark assessment. He seems to view this through a lens of fundamental threats to democracy and legal norms, then? How does he connect the administration's actions specifically to that perspective?
Well, he sees it as part of a pattern of attacking institutions and norms. He's been particularly critical, as reported in our sources, of the administration's attacks on judges, calling them hypocritical, lawless, even a provocation.
Attacks on judges?
Yeah, he commented specifically on a social media post from Trump that was directed at Chief Justice Roberts, urging him to stop the nationwide injunctions now before it's too late. Tribe called that post ominous, and basically an attempt to intimidate judges, suggesting it could even make them fear for their safety, like being shot or other terrible things.
Wow. Nationwide injunctions are a specific legal tool courts sometimes use, right? What's the administration's issue with them, from Tribe's perspective?
Well, according to Tribe, the irony is that the administration and what he calls the Maggie A movement actually supported nationwide injunctions under the previous administration for things they wanted.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Like blocking certain student loan programs or restricting abortion access. A nationwide injunction essentially means a single court ruling applies across the entire country, not just to the parties in that specific case.
Okay, so broad impact.
Right. And Tribe's point is that when a government action like invoking something really extreme, such as the Alien Enemies Act.
Alien Enemies Act.
Yeah. An old law, he notes, was used most recently in the context of the Japanese internment case, Korematsu, during World War II. When an action like that violates the law or the Constitution, courts like Judge Bosberg's, in his view, don't really have an alternative but to intervene with these broad orders, even if it means telling the government, as he put it rather vividly, to turn those planes around.
So in Tribe's view, courts are sometimes obligated to issue these broad orders when the government acts unlawfully and the administration is being inconsistent in its criticism of them. Is that the idea?
Exactly. That's his argument. And he also pushed back really strongly on the administration, calling Judge Bosberg, remember, the judge in that separate ruling about other international students we mentioned,
Right.
calling him a radical left lunatic. Tribe stated that Judge Bosberg is universally respected, is not considered left-wing, and was even appointed to the sensitive FISA court by Chief Justice Roberts himself, alongside other conservative judges.
So the radical left lunatic label doesn't fit the facts, according to Tribe.
Not at all in his view. He saw the administration's statement about the judge as self-contradictory and just part of that broader pattern of attacking institutions he's worried about.
It sounds like his personal background might also play a role in this deep concern he has for legal norms and especially immigrant rights.
Yes, absolutely. His own history is definitely woven into this perspective. He was born in Shanghai. His family were Russian Jews who had to immigrate to the U.S. after his father, who was an American citizen, was actually interned by the Japanese during World War II.
Wow. Interned by the Japanese.
Yeah, and that refugee experience, combined with learning later about these incredibly narrow escapes, like something called the Passover Plot, that apparently almost led to the drowning of Shanghai Jews.
Oh my goodness.
It seems to have given him a really deep sympathy for refugees and immigrants, a strong sense of injustice, and what he feels is an obligation to pay it forward, by making a
Yeah,
difference.
yeah,
He's quoted as viewing the country as being in the gravest danger in his lifetime of losing constitutional democracy and the rule of law.
the gravest danger in his lifetime.
Yeah. And he sees his work, including speaking out on these kinds of issues, as helping to resist that and restore norms. Driven in part by his concern for things like immigrant rights, which is, of course, an issue directly tied to the Harvard ban's impact.
Yeah. That personal history certainly provides a powerful context for his analysis of events like this one.
It really does. It shapes his entire outlook, it seems.
So what does this all mean? Where does this leave us? This deep dive into the sources reveals a really complex situation, doesn't it?
It really does.
We've seen how the government's action against Harvard is tangled up with political tensions, accusations about campus climate, specific policies like DEI, and these broader concerns about foreign ties.
Mm-hmm. And we've unpacked the significant immediate consequences potentially disrupting the lives of thousands of international students, putting important university research at risk,
Yeah.
with major financial implications for Harvard, too.
And we've also heard just a range of passionate responses from within the Harvard community itself, from those proud of the university's stand against what they see as overreach,
Right.
to those with specific legal arguments about policies like DEI and others, connecting these events to much larger global and political issues.
And from a prominent legal scholar, Lawrence Tribe, we've heard a perspective that views this specific action against Harvard not in isolation, but as part of a larger worrying pattern, one that he believes threatens the very foundations of the rule of law and constitutional democracy in the country.
So the legal battles challenging this ban are just beginning, really. And their outcome could have significant implications, not just for Harvard, obviously, but potentially for how international students and universities operate across the entire country.
Absolutely. It feels like a pivotal moment, which I think leaves us with a provocative thought to consider.
Okay.
In a world where universities are increasingly global hubs, connecting knowledge and talent across borders, what is the right balance of power between these academic institutions and the government? And maybe more pointedly, when that relationship becomes adversarial, like we're seeing here, whose interests are ultimately being served? Is it the students, the university's research mission, the government's stated security concerns, or perhaps other political aims?
Whose interests are being served? That's definitely something to mull over as you think about the future of higher education and, well, the rule of law itself.